My name is Noisha Anacleto. I'm a part of the Advocate. I'm the social media manager, and I'm here with.
Camille Santana. I'm counseling faculty here at Contra Costa.
Why do you think it's important for the Filipinx community to find their culture?
Yo, that's a real question. We were never taught our culture growing up. When you come from a colonized country, and this is, I think, common across the world, to survive, our parents and our ancestors had to assimilate to survive. Um, if you stayed with your indigenous practices, you would be labeled or like killed. Like it was like beat out of us about our cultural practices. So to survive, our ancestors had to do that. But now, as Filipino Americans, Filipinx Americans, I think there's a lot of hunger and longing and a feeling of being lost when you don't have a connection that's deep to what your ancestors were and how they lived and their practices. So when we have really high rates of suicide in the Filipino American community, we have high rates of depression, we have high rates of anxiety. I think that's directly linked to not knowing our cultural roots and valuing who we were as, Filipino, Filipinx folks. But our parents never learned it. So I think in the Bay Area, there's a lot of people reclaiming that identity through research and books, through the internet, through getting involved with culture bearers that are bringing these practices of dance and music. And writing our own stories is also critical too, because growing up, we didn't have access to a lot of books about these different cultures that we came from. So now we're seeing a lot more of that. We're seeing kids' books starting to teach little ones about Filipino culture. And that's like really different than it was 20, 30 years ago. So it's a good time. And I think a lot of different communities are recognizing the value of knowing their cultural indigenous roots.
What do you hope for the Filipino community in the future?
I want to see a lot more healing
Mm-hmm.
and wellness. I think a lot of families in our community really struggle with mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very secret. There's a lot of stigma around it, and I think it's similar to a lot of Asian American communities. Like I just, learned over the last week that like the number one cause of death for young Filipinos is suicide. It's not like a physical health issue, but it used to be lower on the list, but it's number one right now. And so we really have to look at that. My own sister is bipolar, and like I talked to a lot of other Filipino families, and like the struggle of like, a lot of people, our families become the mental health care provider for a person in our families, and it's a big burden on our families. And when we trace back, what's happening in our families, we have parents that never healed from colonial wounding. We have parents that have intergenerational trauma that goes back many generations that's never been dealt with. And they were just trying to survive when they immigrated here, and they didn't have time to talk with therapists. So they like did some crazy stuff to their kids in terms of like not seeing their kids and not loving their kids in the way that the kids needed to be loved and seen. So I think Filipino Americans now are recognizing that, and they're trying to raise their kids differently. But there's still that hurt with that generation above us, like with people my age. I'm in my early 40s, and with their parents, there's a lot of rift between those generations. And like what helped me survive being in a crazy Filipino family was my cousins. Like I could be like, my mom's crazy, and they're like, yeah, I know, my mom's crazy too. So that we were each other's peer support group. But that helped us survive. But I think a lot of Filipinos in the Bay Area are really looking at like, how do we break these cycles of intergenerational trauma and violence, so we raise our kids in a different way, so they're not growing up suicidal, anxious, depression, because they were never allowed to like speak about what was happening with them with their parents. There was always just a distancing between their parents because their parents were also traumatized. So trying to break the cycles is huge. That's what I would like to see in the Filipino community. And I work with Filipino Mental Health Initiative. We do a gathering called Kapwa is Medicine. So Kapwa is community. So we get folks together that are working on like wellness and health with their selves and with their families. We get together once a month. We do cultural practices. We hike. We get into nature, which our ancestors did, and that heals us. Being in community heals us. Eating our traditional foods heals us. Playing our music heals us. doing our movements and our dance heals us. So being connected in those ways, I think 100% makes me a more well person. But I would like to see us break those cycles of intergenerational trauma coming from colonialism, imperialism, in the Filipino community.
My last question is, what kind of resources can Filipinos who are trying to get in touch with their access to other than the ones that you've mentioned?
Let's see. Filipino Mental Health Initiative out of San Francisco is amazing. Follow them on Instagram. They got their own little website and Facebook too. Filipino Mental Health Initiative out of San Mateo. Check them out. There's also a Filipino Mental Health Initiative out of Solano. Those three are great. There's a lot of Filipino American like cultural music and dance groups coming out of San Francisco that offer free workshops all the time. So that's amazing. There's also a group for young men and men called Brocada. Barcada is like your community and homies, and then they changed it into Brocada, so it's super cute. But yeah, a lot of healing needs to happen with our men too. You know, like I think a lot of women are drawn to like healing work. Men need those spaces 100% because you know they heal in a different way too. Let's see. Yeah, the mental health, Filipino mental health initiative stuff, the cultural stuff happening out of San Francisco is dope. Parangal is amazing. There's other groups too. But yeah, I'm totally open if y'all want to like. I'm a counselor. You can make an appointment with me. We can always talk about those things. And we also have the API Student Association here. And we have our MENA Club, Middle East North African Club, and our Muslim Student Association. But those are communities that are intentional, coming together once a week to support each other. We learn different topics. We have like social events and have a good time together. But APISA meets every Monday, 4 to 5, student life. And then MENA and MSA meet second and fourth week on Wednesdays in the GE building. I think it's on the third floor. But you can check with Student Life for details. But follow them on Instagram. I can give you the handles, but I don't memorize it. Okay.
And that's it for The Advocate. Thank you.
Thanks.